In a recent video, we looked into the Journal of the 501st Legion, the story campaign for the original Star Wars Battlefront 2, and how it shed light on the Clone Wars. By popular demand, we're doing a part 2 for that video, this time detailing the parts of the campaign set in the Imperial era. This time, we'll be looking at the Imperial 501st and what their recorded experiences say about what it was like to serve in the Galactic Empire.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
During the rise of the Empire, the Emperor's home planet of Naboo rapidly established itself as a major irritant. After a number of Naboo's ambassadors were sent home in various states of dismemberment, her newly elected queen broke off diplomatic ties and began exploring military options. Clearly, it was time for a regime change. A change that would be effected by the 501st, now under the direct command of Darth Vader. Our orders were simple: to infiltrate the city, take out their leader, sending a clear signal to other potential troublemakers in the Empire. With the Queen eliminated, Naboo quickly fell in line. It was the first time the 501st was called upon to adjust a planet's government. But it wouldn't be the last. Within months, the 501st gained a well-deserved reputation as Vader's fist.
In case you didn't notice, the rebellion of Naboo, in this clip, was described in terms that could reasonably have been applied to many separatist worlds during the Clone Wars. This is intention. To the Empire, early rebellions were indistinguishable from separatism, and they were treated similarly. The 501st's Naboo operation was no different at all from many similar missions ordered by the Republic during the Clone Wars. To Imperial soldiers and Imperial citizens as well, there was no difference between these new rebels and the CIS.
Although the Clone Wars were over, some people never seemed to get the message. The worst case of denial was Geetsly, a Geonosian separatist who'd somehow escaped Lord Vader's efforts to wipe out the remnants of the CIS. Lord Vader tracked him to Mustafar and brought us in to finish the job. It seemed like a simple enough mission, but when we saw the fleet of droid ships hovering over the planet, we suddenly realized that Delso's denial mechanisms were a little more dangerous than we'd imagined.
As we've discussed in an earlier video, the Clone Wars didn't end for many parts of the galaxy with the mission to Mustafar. For years after the declaration of a new order, the Empire justified its existence in wars against the remnants of the CIS. Geetsly Delso was one such holdout, and though he was a rarity in that he continued to use battle droids, there were many leaders like him across the galaxy that the Empire had to put down for years after the end of the Clone Wars. The Separatist holdouts were eventually wiped out, of course, and those Separatists that survived went on to join the Rebel Alliance.
By the time we'd made our way to the molten surface of Mustafar, it was apparent that Delso had been a busy little bug. All by his lonesome, he'd found a previously hidden droid factory, fired it up and cranked out his own private army of battle droids. Needless to say, this got the men of the 501st a little hot under the helmet, and not just because of all that lava. Truth be told, we'd all had our fill of those gearheads during the war, and we couldn't stomach the thought of going through another one. So we blew them up. Blew up the droids, blew up the factory, damn near blew up the planet.
The Empire did everything in its power to prevent cases like Delso's. Naturally, they feared the return of a droid army, and for good reason, and so the Imperial troops were constantly involved in seizing old droid factories and warehouses of old droids. In some cases, like with Mustafar, they simply destroyed them. With others, they actually seized the droids for their own use. Dwarf spider droids and droidicas both saw fairly extensive service as part of the Imperial army, and though veterans of the Clone Wars weren't exactly pleased with this arrangement, later recruits came to appreciate the deadly effectiveness of these droids.
Officially, there never was a clone rebellion on Kamino. Unofficially, approximately 20 years after we were created, a special detachment of the Imperial 501st Legion was dispatched to Camino with orders to eradicate an army of clones that had been bred to take arms against the Empire. Our mission commander, an expert on the inner workings of Camino, was a young bounty hunter named Boba Fett. The bounty hunter left after the battle was over. He said something about tracking down a smuggler on Tatooine. After the Camino uprising, the Emperor decided that an army of genetically identical soldiers was too susceptible to corruption. Future troopers would be cloned from a variety of templates. Though the 501st itself remained pure, the rest of the Imperial Army gradually became more and more diverse. We never really got used to the new guys.
It's no secret that the ranks of the Stormtrooper Corps began to diversify as the dark times went on, thanks to the introduction of new clone lines and natural-born recruits. This decreased the quality of Stormtroopers, who gradually went from the feared elite of the Empire to target practice for opportunistic rebels. Those Stormtroopers that were veterans of the Clone Wars came to resent these new recruits for this reason, even as their own skills began to deteriorate with age.
Once it was finally finished, the Death Star was the Emperor's favorite toy. It was also the most boring assignment in the galaxy for a Stormtrooper. Tedious inspection drills, endless hours of guarding impregnable force field generators. Things got so bad that when a prison break erupted in the cell block, we were almost happy to have someone shooting at us again. If only we'd known what an embarrassing snipe storm we were about to wade into. We probably would have jettisoned the whole detention block into space. After the embarrassment of the prison break, Lord Vader removed us from our comfortable belay and began dragging the 501st across the galaxy in a dangerous hunt for the now missing Death Star plans. Ironically, our punishment eventually proved to be our salvation. The poor souls who took our place in the detention area were completely wiped out when the Death Star was destroyed.
It goes without saying that those who commanded the use of the Death Star were evil, but the same can't really be said for those that were simply assigned to garrison it. For Stormtroopers, it was just another routine assignment, and a boring one at that. They weren't on the Death Star because they were eager to go commit genocide. Most of them probably doubted the Death Star would ever really be used to its full potential.
By the time of the raid on Polis Massa, the men of the 501st were starting to get a little sick of this so-called rebellion. In the past, we'd secretly enjoyed putting down a local insurrection or two. They kept the troops sharp and the Empire feared. But these rebels were different. They were organized, they were growing, and they were everywhere. The raid on Polis Massa was a perfect example of how things were starting to fall apart. We were supposed to go in, wipe out a small band of rebels, and recover some stolen Imperial plans on an encrypted holodisk. Before we knew it, we were nearly overrun by rebel forces, with the holodisk nowhere to be found.
The raid on Polis Massa was a sign of how the quality of the 501st was beginning to drop. Vader's fist was no longer the unit of elite soldiers that it was during the Clone Wars. Its veterans were aging fast, and the newer recruits were less prepared for combat. When the Rebel Alliance formed and began giving the Empire trouble, these weaknesses began to show in the early battles, as Imperial overconfidence granted the Alliance several victories. This made the Rebels bolder, and things snowballed down for the Empire from there.
With the information gathered on Polis Massa, Vader concluded that the stolen plans had been given to Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan. We weren't surprised. For all their talk of being a peaceful planet, Alderaan had been thumbing its nose at the Empire for years. After a brief and pointless battle, we boarded the ship, the Tantive 4, over Tatooine, began looking for the plans, and waited for Lord Vader's arrival. After Lord Vader took custody of Princess Leia, we all figured it was just a matter of time before she coughed up the plans. Many of us had been unwilling witnesses to VADER'S powers of persuasion in the past. The thought of a pampered little princess resisting his terrible will was inconceivable.
The Empire severely underestimated the threat the rebellion posed, and this overconfidence didn't really die down right up until the Battle of Endor. The manner in which this 501st soldier looks back on the Tantive 4 mission, treating it as a casual operation and being dismissive of Princess Leia, is just another example of this. The Imperial troops had grown soft, and the Empire itself had grown complacent, which is never a good sign for any sort of Imperial state.
When the Death Star was destroyed, about half of the 501st Legion was still in the hangar getting into their ships. Of those who made it out, another third were caught in the explosion. I'd fought with some of those men for over 20 years. Afterwards, those of us that survived hooked up with a nearby Imperial fleet making a retaliatory strike on the rebels' base on Yavin 4. It wasn't the best thought out plan, but we were cut off from our leaders, tired and operating on instinct. If not for our training, we probably would have never gotten past their orbital defenses.
When looking purely at the original trilogy, it can be hard to see why people would actually be fighting for the Empire. This clip details one reason why. In the original trilogy, the destruction of the Death Star is a happy moment, a victory for the good guys, but here we see the other side of the coin. For the men of the 501st, it was a slaughter that claimed the lives of thousands of their friends and brothers. They were fighting the rebels to avenge those brothers, and to prevent them from killing any more.
By the time we landed on Yavin, whatever shock we'd felt at the destruction of the Death Star had been replaced by anger. For months we'd treated the rebellion like a disobedient child, only to be repaid for our tolerance with treachery on an unimaginable scale. Frankly, I don't remember much of the fighting. I guess we won.
The prelude to the Imperial assault on Yavin provides an interesting bit of detail on the Imperial view of the rebellion. To the men of the 501st, they had done nothing to deserve the mass casualties that the destruction of the Death Star incurred. They had seen themselves as somewhat merciful. Sure, they put down insurrections, but they could have done worse, and they gave dissidents more tolerance than they really had to. Of course, this is casually ignoring the destruction of Alderaan, which kind of renders the whole thing a moot point, but the perspective is still interesting nonetheless.
No one ever complained about the cold on Hoth. We never felt it, even though we were blinded by blizzards. We could see the final end of the rebellion in our blaster sights. Was it only a mirage, perhaps? But on that day, on that planet, our blood ran hot with dreams of victory, melting the ice that stood in our way. As the rebels fled, the 501st gathered around a burning bunker and let out a cheer that shook the stars. The rebellion was done. The Death Star was being rebuilt bigger than ever. Order had finally returned to the galaxy, in no small part due to the efforts of the fighting men of the 501st.
It was an interesting choice on the part of the game writers to make Hoth the final mission of the story campaign, and in all honesty, it was a good choice, and it put some perspective on the battle. In The Empire Strikes Back, the blow that Hoth was to the rebellion isn't felt all that much. It was at the start of the movie, and so nobody was under the illusion that it was the end of the rebellion. By putting Hoth at the end of Battlefront 2's story, however, the game's writers gave a better picture of how the galaxy at large probably viewed the battle. On Hoth, despite several slip-ups, the Empire utterly crushed their opponents and captured the rebels' main base. The Alliance, for a time, fled the galaxy entirely. For everyone that wasn't tied to the rebellion, it must have seemed like the end of the Galactic Civil War. Of course, as we all know quite well, it wasn't. So that's our take on the second half of the 501st Journal. But as per usual guys, I want to know what you think. Would you be interested in more Galactic Civil War era content on this channel, or are you just happy with us sticking to the Clone Wars era? Let me know in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, if you want to be a clone trooper, stormtrooper, join the 501st, 212th, do anything to your heart's content in the Star Wars universe, our Geetsly's gaming network has you covered. We've got our Clone Wars roleplay on Gmod, our Imperial roleplay on Gmod, as well as our Roblox roleplay servers that are currently under development. So all those links are in the description below. And also, don't forget that I have a second history channel as well that covers all the niche and unknown topics of World War II in a fun and informative way. So if that's your type of thing, the link's there as well. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.